Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Tuesday, May the 6th, and my name's Anne McElvoy of Politico. Back after those seismic election results last week gave Britain an indication of how politics might be changing for good, or at least changing.
And my name's Sam Coates of Sky News. Welcome to Politics at Sam and the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes, just in time for your commute. And my sense from this morning and the last few days, Anne, is that politics generally right now and the people who play in that playground are in an absolute funk. Anne, would you agree?
Well, that's going to be one of the big topics of this podcast, isn't it? Like, what is the funk exactly? So here's my nutshell version. I think reform has provided in these local elections, in those council wins, in those mayoralties, whether it's won, whether it's run Labour close or eclipsed the Conservatives, that it really can take the fight to both. And one thing I've been looking at over the long weekend, Sam, is the self-appointed Northern Tsar of this podcast is the sweep. I know the accent can deceive, but I'm a proper Northeast girl. Is the sweep of Nigel Farage's appeal out of those hard-pressed parts of the country into more aspiring, more middle-class areas. And so the reform effect is now really beginning to show in the responses of the two main parties, not just on how they tackle left behind Britain and the red wall, or is it now the partly turquoise wall, but also how they respond on many other policy areas. And I think you've got some really great insights coming up on that.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's the march of reform, not just into different areas. And there is just look at the map of where reform support is. There's a light blue wall all across Northern England. So I'm very glad that we've got a Northern Tsar because I remain firmly metropolitan. The north of the River Thames is a bit too much for me. But it's that demographic reach into different types of Tory and Labour voter, middle class Tory voters and working class Labour voters are now Reform UK targets, and that's a massive thing. But my reason for thinking there's a funk is different. It's because I just look everywhere, sort of in every last corner of my phone and my WhatsApps, right? So this morning is just there's just that smell of chaos everywhere. Number 10 is very insistently hosing down any suggestion that there's a review of the winter fuel allowance. Surprise, surprise, the government is briefing an immigration crackdown. That's on the front page of the Times. The details are still being slightly worked out, but it feels a little bit like painting by numbers when the first working day after a set of local elections where a Nigel Farage party does well and you brief an immigration crackdown that isn't quite ready yet. I mean, who could have predicted that? Labour MPs are losing it, particularly with Commons leader Lucy Powell for her comments on grooming gangs. A bit more on that in a moment. And Tory MPs are definitely losing it, as are people around the shadow cabinet. Even the Greens. I didn't see that. This wasn't on the bingo card, Anne. Even the Greens are losing it. There's a challenge by the deputy leader against the two co-leaders. It feels, and they'll love me for saying this, only the Liberal Democrats are sitting pretty because they're watching kind of all the other main parties sort of toddle off, following Reform UK. And they're the only people going, goodbye, see ya, we're not doing that. So there's one small corner of yellow that's got, pretty happy, but everywhere else, it's like a kind of gigantic political hangover.
Everyone apart from the Lib Dems seems to be in some way dancing to reform's tune or responding to it. The newest MP there, Sarah Potchin, gets sworn in today at 2:30 after winning that Runcorn by-election by the smallest margin in history, but a great leap forward for reform to have taken that seat.
That's right. They get up to 5 MPs once more. Talking to Reform overnight, they're not actually doing very much other than watching Sarah Potchin. But what we do know is that Nigel Farage's party is just concentrating more generally on local government. That's all they're saying about their party's activity today. And kind of as well they might. I mean, they won outright 10 councils along with 2 mayoralties. And they did so on 32% of the vote, which is a huge increase on the general election. This is why everyone's in the two main parties so worried. It's up 17 points, according to Michael Thrasher's tally, compared to the general election. So Reform UK on 32, Labour second on 19%. So that's a massive drop from the general election, down 16 points. And the Conservatives on 18 points, so a fall of 6 points. So Tories going backwards, Labour really going backwards. Those are the lowest ever tallies for Tory and Labour since the data started being collected for for local elections. It's how you calculate local elections if they were a sort of national vote. Is what Sky's Michael Thrash has been doing forever. The lowest ever tally. So Lib Dems only 2 points behind on 16%, and Greens on 7%, by the way.
And we certainly haven't heard the last of that from ousted council leaders. I know that in Kent, there's a really huge council across Kent where Reform have taken control. Long-standing Tory there, Roger Gough, saying that the entire Conservative vote was just hollowed out and that this needed a major rethink. So I think we're going to hear a lot of pressure coming from those councils where Conservatives lost under Kami Badenoch, asking for real change there pretty quickly. But today, it seems to me that the major impact is on the government, is on Labour. You talked about a funk earlier on. It's a kind of quadruple funk, isn't it? Because it's sort of number 10, it's the Treasury, it's what do you do about specifically about the areas that we've talked about and others, but it's more broadly, where is the Labour message now, Sam, after this reform rout in many places?
Oh gosh, I mean this is a great question, Anne.
That's why I put it to you rather than answering myself.
And because the answer is that I really, really sense that people aren't sure. There's a real sense that Labour are trying to work out how to respond to this, but haven't got anything like a sort of settled view. I can only give you. Often journalists sort of overstate what they know, and it's a sort of pitfall of the profession. But I'm going to give you only what I feel I definitely know, and that's one of the things I've been picking up over the last few days. Is like nobody feels empowered in this government. It's really weird. When you talk to advisors, MPs, even cabinet ministers, so often they feel like they're commentators rather than participants. I was speaking to one person in government over the last 3 days, and their description of it, and they are in a position to do things, but they said, well, this government is like watching a car crash, but being unable to do anything to stop it, right? So that is somebody, with their hands, on the executive leader, talking about this government in the third person. And you get that quite a lot. I was talking to another person who's sort of tight with all sorts of people over the top of the Labour movement. And they were saying, look, just nobody has any agency. They all don't think they can do anything, which is weird because they are the government. And so things happen like the Sunday Times story about the reshuffle. Now, that was a bit of Tim Shipman. It was an excellent long read by Tim Shipman in the Sunday Times. And then, in effect, he sacked Bridget Phillipson, again, who we've talked about on this podcast, being the sort of on the receiving end of briefing. And he not only sacked Lisa Landy, but he abolished her entire department, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. And the thing is, Anne, that now that may end up being true, or it might end up being not true. However, I think those two cabinet ministers, by dint of that briefing, and by the fact that it's not at all being shut down or briefed or sort of countermanded by the centre, it hobbles those two cabinet ministers, whether everybody likes it or not. They are now less powerful than they were because everybody thinks they're going to be moved because number 10 isn't sending any signals to contradict that, right? You have taken out two cabinet ministers by not doing anything. I like that is sort of another area in which this government just feels a bit powerless.
You do get sort of late Tory government vibes from that, don't you? I was thinking everything you said there, how we could have said that in the decline and fall period as it really started to fall off there for the Conservatives and put different names on it. People didn't feel empowered. They felt they were going to be ousted in some reshuffle over which, whether or not they deserved it or not. And then the bit of counter briefing takes off as well. And it seems extraordinary on the majority that Keir Starmer has that they should have ended up here. But something that struck me as well, which was clearly a terrible foot in mouth moment, was Lucy Powell and those comments there on the BBC's Any Questions about the grooming gangs, when she was effectively triggered by Tim Montgomery, a pro-reform commentator, of course, also a Conservative with a long pedigree as a commentator. And really, before he could finish his point about the gangs, she was dissing it. The tone was terrible, blowing your little trumpet. It was awful. And what struck me was, I think you could say everyone was tired, everyone was run ragged. There was a shock effect from this reform chasing Labour so hard, and particularly in its previous solid territories. But why not be better prepared? I mean, Lucy Powell, I've done a lot of those panels with Lucy Powell. She's usually pretty well prepared. She's absolutely solid. She's a down the middle Labour kind of person, leader of the Commons now. But to have people going out without better lines to talk about, so that when somebody triggers them about a reformy kind of talking point, and I don't mean that in any sort of dismissive way, but it is very strong for reform, that anger, and not to have a response to it. I think there's a real grip there. It's about communications, but it's about more than that, isn't it?
I mean, the comments by Lucy Powell, she also said that talking about grooming gangs, as Montgomery was a dog whistle issue, right?
Mm,
I did sort of think it wasn't a lack of preparedness. It wasn't a lack of briefing.
mm,
I got the impression that's what she really thinks. Her knee-jerk go-to point
mm.
that she probably does in private if you bring up grooming gangs felt like it was the point she was making on Any Questions. But there's no doubt that sort of lit the touch paper. Because while Labour MPs, I think, have been struggling to respond to large parts of how the government is dealing with all of this, do they become more reform light? Do they concentrate on immigration? How do they win back the voters they're clearly losing? Everybody united around condemning Commons leader Lucy Powell's comments. I could almost hear the thumping on the iPhone as the angry messages were being typed out to me. One Labour MP called it a terrible mistake. They said, Labour women have fought for years for decent services for survivors across national and local government. It was us that blew the whistle. But a slip like that will count for more than all the action in the world in this climate. That said, Lucy Powell did come out afterwards and say that she did regard child exploitation and grooming with the utmost seriousness and kind of apologise, saying, I'm sorry if this is unclear. She's saying that she was talking about the political point scoring around it, not the issue itself. And she's dealt with all of this stuff as a constituency MP. People were still cross, though. I mean, I think there was a sort of sense of heartbreak. Lucy Powell on that list, I think, of people who may well be reshuffled. Just a little detail on that. She has been blamed, I think she would deny it, for a leak way, way, way earlier in this parliament to do with banning smoking in pub gardens. She was fingered as the person who leaked that. She would deny it, but that continues to rattle around large parts of the Labour Party, and is one of the reasons cited why she may also be for the chop. By the way, Tim Shipman's story, fascinating. I was talking to somebody else over the last 3 days about the reshuffle. They said they completely believed it because they heard 4 days before from somebody who would know whether there was going to be a reshuffle or not, them saying very similar things. So this stuff is rattling around. And so that's why, unless Number 10 get a grip of the reshuffle story, cabinet ministers who are in the firing line will just simply find officials not doing what they want, people not really believing, not kind of preparing as hard for them, and not acting as if they have the authority than they otherwise would do. Cabinet ministers who are hobbled are less effective for Keir Starmer. There are at least now 3 that have been hobbled. And Anne, what links those 3?
They're all women. And are you saying, real Sherlock Holmes here, that this is a sort of propensity? Because that's quite a strong accusation there, Mr. Coates, that the Prime Minister is probably more likely to sack women, or move women, I should say.
I think I'm making a gentler observation that that on the receiving end of briefings, there often seem to be women. Once upon a time, I'm old enough to remember when it was Sue Gray, and in fact, in the last 3 days, I was told we're still witnessing the long tail of Sue Gray. So she doesn't escape blame at the moment. But the one woman who never gets criticism from the top, it would seem, from the number 10 end of things, is
Rachel Reeves. And I was just about to open that front and say to you, look, where do we think this leaves the Chancellor? Because we've seen some reporting on winter fuel that there is a possible review of that cut pending. That's via the Guardian with its reporting that there was a plan being discussed to raise the threshold at which pensioners stop being eligible for the benefit. That set a lot of hairs running. But a bit of insight into that, Sam. Do we believe that is true? And also, like, my reflection here is how much further can Keir Starmer go in terms of a reset in the wake of the reform advance without it coming very, very close to singeing his chancellor?
Well, that's the whole point, isn't it? Look, so this morning, The Guardian are reporting that maybe there might be tweaks to the winter fuel cut that Rachel Reeves announced pretty quickly after coming into government. Number 10 are knocking that down. Now, I have to say, Anne, nothing says studs up against a story than a 5:52 a.m. unsolicited voicemail from somebody in number 10. But that's what I got this morning. Plop, it dropped into my into my WhatsApps. Somebody from number 10 goes, absolutely no review into that. They're not changing it. Firmly tonight. That's the single thing they wanted me to know more than anything else this morning. And we thank number 10 for their engagement in this podcast. It is actually very helpful. But.
We love the number 10 marketing department.
we are.
Quite happy they get Sam Coates up earlier than me.
But few things worth noting. First of all, winter fuel allowance cuts were, according to Labour MPs talking to me, a genuine factor on the doorstep, particularly in Runcorn. Secondly, I've actually got some sympathy for the Guardian journalist. Like, you always feel really sore when number 10 come in and deny yourself. But I've been picking up stuff around this too. 6 months ago, there was an absolute dogged defensiveness of the winter fuel allowance cuts, according to some of my sources when they sort of pushed back against them. Now in the conversations over the last few days, there had been a much greater openness to accepting that maybe all was not well with them. And there was a change in the tone of the conversation. I was hearing that. And, in absence of the Guardian story, I was going to bring that up this morning because I picked that up over the weekend. But I think you take that conversation to its logical extent. If you do anything about the winter fuel allowance, you are casting a massive black mark on Rachel Reeves' judgment, right? And to go back on that, you have to claim that effectively one of the biggest and most defining things that she has done, she was wrong at. And at that point, it's really hard to see her staying in her job. And I think number 10 have probably overnight done all of those calculations and realized that the best way of dealing with this is shooting down the story, even though I think there was an openness to all of this in recent days.
Fascinating, because one of the big deltas that I'm picking up inside the government at the moment, listeners to the podcast might have picked up, I was with Rachel Reeves and her team in the US recently, and the message there was full steam ahead on the domestic reform agenda, on growth, but yes, also on that spending corset, that kind of girdle of promises that has tied Rachel Reeves in, and where she has had to, or as they would say, has had to make these cuts that are tricky, not just tricky, I think absolutely now look like they're damaging Labour's re-election chances quite badly. So they're really kind of stuck on that message. They believe consistency will pay off for them, or at least formally that was the position. But then we heard Ross Jones there in Doncaster, forthright, obviously very well-known mayor who squeaked home for Labour in that seat. But she delivered a real scolding to Rachel Reeves on the winter fuel allowance, on PIP and the cuts to disability entitlements, etc. And she just said that voters are very unhappy about these and that the government needed to rethink. I bet she will be soon, the red carpet will be rolled out for her, Sam, in Downing Street to put her points across in private. But it just seems to be a bit of a clash to have these two messages going on at once. And that will, I think, eat up confidence in the government. It has to decide where it wants to stick and where it is prepared to make a change or even twist.
One more final reflection, and we're going to come back to this later this week, I think. This all bleeds into a wider policy uncertainty, right? Take one of the biggest issues, the EU reset. I was astonished over the weekend to find out that one of the cornerstones of it, the whatever kind of EU youth mobility scheme is included, is part of the talks, isn't going to be ready by the time of the May 19th reset, which I think had been the plan. I mean, it's incredible, and I think, as far as I can tell, that's because we can't agree as a country what we want. So we don't know what we want because of the internal battles. If it increases migration, is that a problem? Is that more toxic now because of the position of Reform UK? Same goes with India. There's an update on India coming later this week. Now, I don't think the Indian trade deal is going to increase migration, but it is going to reduce the amount of tax that Indians have to pay in the UK. That feels incredibly tricky as well. How does the government respond to Donald Trump basically announcing he's going to decimate one of the largest industries in this country, the creative industries, the film industry, as he says, 100% tariffs on films going into the US. Huge stuff on the agenda. A lot of it requiring choices. Keir Starmer always saying, I don't have to choose. He's not, it's not in his nature to like to choose. But this is the bit where the rubber hits the road. They've got to make some choices, and they're on the back foot emotionally and politically as they prepare to do the most difficult stuff, I would argue, in this parliament.
Youth mobility scheme, going to have to do this very fast, Sam, but I hope that we come back to it because it's so core to what the German government, we've got Friedrich Merz now finally ensconced as Chancellor. He completed his cabinet in Berlin yesterday, and that big reset on relations with Britain for May the 19th. The youth mobility scheme has ended up absolutely at the core of what the German government has been asking for as a symbolic rebuilding of trust in the wake of the Brexit fallout. It's an EU scheme, but it's really the Germans driving it, got to be honest. Watch the new foreign minister and how he responds to what you're describing there, that tension between something that's promised and how it's going to be delivered or watered down. That's Johannes Wadefuhl, who is a very strong defence policy expert. So I think we'll see a warm relationship there with Britain on that and on all of that good stuff on defence and AI planning. But I do think that there are still problems about a misalignment of the two governments just 2 weeks away from that big summit on what was meant to be a cornerstone of it, the youth mobility scheme.
You've said it before, Anne. I'm going to say it again. Trust is important. Trust is so important. And at the beginning of this podcast, we promised to do it in under 20 minutes. And we have broken our vow. We have let ourselves down and we've let our listeners down. We beg for forgiveness for the extra 90 seconds for 2 minutes. But we're going to bring the house down on this now to hope that we can repair relations and come back tomorrow. So thank you very much indeed for listening. We'll be back on Wednesday morning for PMQs and lots more besides. So I'll see you then.
We've got to get the delivery unit in on that 20 minutes. But there was a lot going on. See you tomorrow.
There was. See you then.
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malta Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.